Welcome to today's episode of Rethinking the Slavery Blame Game, Africans, Eurocentrism, and Historical Truth. I'm your host, and today we're diving into a critical and often misunderstood subject, responsibility for the Atlantic slave trade. The narrative often stated, Africans enslaved Africans, deserves some serious rethinking. Does it simplify a complex history? It certainly does. This episode aims to unpack that phrase's implications and clarify what's often obscured by sweeping generalizations. Joining us today is Professor Kwabena Akurang Parry, a distinguished scholar of Africana studies and world history. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here to discuss such an important issue.
Let's start with this phrase, Africans enslaved Africans. It seems straightforward at first, doesn't it? But what does it imply historically?
Indeed, on the surface, it appears to admit a painful truth. However, as I highlight in my research, this narrative is misleading and harmful. Pre-colonial societies in Africa were organized based on local or ethnic identities, not a broad sense of Africanness. For instance, Asante rulers considered captives as individuals from specific states like Aquapem or Dagomba, not as fellow Africans. This mirrors how Christian Scandinavians viewed Slavic captives. Such simplifications erase the diversity and complexity of African identities and politics.
That's a profound point. So that phrase flattens a rich tapestry of cultures into a single guilty label. But why might this be a convenient narrative for some?
Great question. A significant contributor to this blame game narrative stems from a reliance on 19th century European colonial and missionary sources, often written with the intent to justify the moral superiority of colonialism. These sources painted Africans as the chief perpetrators in the slave trade. It underplays European involvement, especially economically through shipping and financing slave trading.
And this impacts the conversation surrounding reparations, doesn't it? How does this skewed history affect current dialogues?
Absolutely. When journalists like Enimil Ashon propagate the notion that Africans were equally guilty as Europeans, they overlook the extensive support systems that European economies provided for the slave trade. The argument shifts responsibility away from the colonial enterprise itself, perpetuating the idea that guilt is communal rather than rooted in specific actions and policies.
So the narrative feeds into a cycle of blaming the oppressed. How did Africans resist this narrative and the trade itself?
Yes, there was significant resistance, and it's crucial to acknowledge this. Societies like the Jula and Balanta in Senegambia actively opposed the Atlantic slave trade. They limited European penetration and defended their autonomy. In places like present-day Ghana, settlement patterns were actually designed to frustrate raiders, proving that Africans were not merely passive participants, but active defenders of their communities.
That's empowering. It seems clear that many, despite overwhelming odds, sought to protect their people. Was resistance only confined to actions taken against raiders?
Not at all. Historical accounts indicate that enslaved people themselves often seized opportunities for resistance. They engaged in rebellions during the Middle Passage and fled when given the chance, showcasing agency despite their dire situations.
This raises an important discussion about abolition, which is often portrayed as a solely European endeavor. What does your research reveal about African contributions to abolition?
Quite the contrary. Long before British abolitionist laws in the 1870s, there were already advocates in the Gold Coast calling for the end of slavery. Editors like Timothy Hutton Brew wrote passionately about the urgent need to fully abolish slavery. This evidence dismantles the notion that Africans were merely passive recipients of European moral guidance.
It's so crucial to highlight these African voices in the larger narrative of emancipation. However, what about modern apologies and discussions of reparations?
Indeed, some African leaders like Matthew Karikou of Benin have issued apologies for their nation's roles in the slave trade. But these need to be viewed as acknowledgments of participation, not confessions of sole culpability. This acknowledgement is often misinterpreted by Eurocentric narratives as accepting full guilt.
How do you see the discussion of reparations evolving from here?
Akurang Parry's concept of reparations emphasizes concrete actions like education, infrastructural development, and resource redistribution. It's essential that these discussions include African perspectives rather than adhering to frameworks imposed by Western institutions. After all, the legacy of slavery still affects communities profoundly today.
As we reach the end of our discussion today, how can we work towards genuine cultural bridge building between descendants of enslaved Africans and those involved in selling enslaved people?
We must remember, as I often reflect from my father's insight, the present-day descendants of enslaved Africans often come from both those who resisted enslavement and those who facilitated it. This understanding encourages compassion instead of competitive guilt, urging us together toward solidarity against ongoing structural inequalities.
Thank you, Professor Akurang Parry, for your invaluable insights today. It's clear that understanding the complexities of history fosters empathy and openness, encouraging constructive dialogues about reparations and resistance.
Thank you for having me. History is never black and white, and I appreciate the opportunity to shed light on these issues.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Remember, history demands a nuanced understanding rather than simplistic definitions. As we continue to explore the past, let's aim for a future built on understanding and cooperation.